Margaret sighed as she sat in the dusty attic, surrounded by boxes that held the remnants of her life with her late husband, James. Spring cleaning was more of a ritual than a necessity for her. It was a quiet way to remember him, to touch the things he once held, and to relive memories of happier times. Each item she picked up told a small piece of their story. Holiday decorations they'd chosen together, souvenirs from trips they'd planned for years, and old photo albums with snapshots of smiles, hugs, and laughter. Yet today, as she was dusting off an old album, something unexpected happened. A faded, folded piece of paper slipped from between the pages and drifted to her lap, its edges yellowed with time. Curious, Margaret gently picked it up. The paper felt delicate, like it might crumble in her hands. She turned it over and noticed James's handwriting on the outside, instantly recognizable, even though the ink was slightly smeared. Her heart skipped as she read the words he'd written on the front. "For my dearest Margaret, to be read when the time is right." Confused, Margaret glanced around the room, as if someone might explain why her husband had hidden a letter from her. A letter she had somehow never seen in all their years together. With trembling hands, Margaret opened the letter. Her eyes scanned the familiar handwriting, her heart racing with a strange mixture of excitement and fear. What could he possibly have meant for her to read only when the time was right? Her heart ached with the realization that he must have written this years ago, long before he left her alone in this world. The letter began simply, just as James was, unpretentious and kind. "My dearest Margaret," it read. "If you're reading this, then I'm no longer with you. And though my time on this earth has ended, my love for you never will." As she read, Margaret felt a lump form in her throat. She could almost hear his voice, gentle and familiar, as if he were speaking to her from the pages. She continued reading, learning how he had worried about her, worried that she might lose herself in grief after he was gone, or that she might feel too alone. He wanted her to remember their love, but to live for herself, to find happiness and purpose again, even without him. But as she reached the final paragraph, she saw something that made her stop. Her breath caught in her chest. James had written something she never expected to read. He mentioned a part of his life she had never known about, something he had kept from her all those years, something he wanted to reveal only after he was gone. He described a dream they had once shared, one that they had abandoned when life's challenges got in the way. Now, in his absence, he urged her to pursue it for herself, as a final promise to him. Margaret's hands trembled as she held the letter, and a wave of questions filled her mind. This secret, this shared dream from a life she thought she knew so well. What was it he wanted her to discover? And as the late afternoon light filtered through the attic window, Margaret felt an unfamiliar spark, a hint of purpose, a call to find what had been left hidden all this time. Margaret sat there in the attic, the letter still open in her hands, as her mind spun with memories she hadn't touched in years. Images of James's face, his gentle smile, the warmth of his laugh flooded her thoughts. But now, every memory felt tinted with a new, mysterious shade. How had she missed this side of him, this dream he'd hidden all along? She thought back to their years together, looking for signs, for anything that might have hinted at what he had written. But nothing came to mind. James had always been open and honest with her, or so she'd believed. And now she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something buried in those years, something she'd missed entirely. Her gaze fell on an old leather-bound journal on a nearby shelf, a journal that had once belonged to James. She remembered him carrying it around, filling it with notes, sketches, and stray thoughts whenever they traveled. She had assumed it was just a place for him to jot down ideas or keep track of the little details that caught his interest. But now she wondered if it held more than just random musings. Slowly, she reached for it, feeling the worn leather under her fingers as she opened it and began flipping through the pages. The journal was filled with James's handwriting, pages upon pages of observations, notes on places they'd visited, and even sketches of things he'd noticed. Flowers, old buildings, and the occasional landscape. She saw reminders of trips they had taken together, memories that were deeply familiar. But as she reached the last section, the handwriting changed. It was tighter, more focused, and the words were carefully chosen. She leaned in closer, heart pounding as she read a passage that spoke of a place, a small coastal town they had once visited years ago, when they were young and still dreaming of what their lives might become. In the entry, he described a small shop by the shore, a place they had talked about one evening as they watched the waves roll in. She remembered the conversation faintly. They'd imagined what it might be like to own a shop there, to sell flowers or books, or maybe even just coffee and pastries to visitors. It was a light-hearted dream, something they had laughed about in passing. But here, in James's journal, he had written about it with such earnestness, almost as if he had clung to that dream long after she had forgotten it. He mentioned how, when the weight of life's struggles felt heavy, he would think of that shop and the simple life it represented. It had been his escape, his secret sanctuary. Margaret sat back, stunned by the realization. This dream, this little shop by the shore, had been more than just a fleeting fantasy for him. It had been a hope, a place he returned to in his heart, a part of him she'd never fully known. And now, he was urging her to find that part of their dream, to make it real in a way they never could together. It felt as though he was guiding her from beyond, giving her a new purpose. Margaret closed the journal and placed it gently beside her, as if it were a fragile relic, a piece of James she hadn't truly understood until now. She sat in silence, letting the discovery settle in her heart. The image of the small seaside shop, nestled among weathered buildings with its quaint sign and shelves filled with things they loved, lingered in her mind like an unspoken promise. She could see herself there, just as they had once imagined together, greeting people with a smile, filling the space with flowers and laughter. She could almost smell the salty air and hear the quiet murmur of the waves lapping against the shore. The thought was intoxicating, pulling her away from the stillness of her empty home and planting her in a place where she could feel alive again, with purpose, with a reason to rise each morning. It was strange, she thought, how a single forgotten dream could awaken something deep within her, like a spark waiting patiently for its moment. But the notion of leaving the comfort of her familiar routines and stepping into the unknown felt daunting, as if the dream was just that, a beautiful, unreachable fantasy. She felt herself retreating, her mind filling with doubts and excuses, trying to rationalize why this dream was best left in the past. But James's words echoed in her mind, tender, yet insistent. Live for yourself, my love. Don't let life pass you by. She realized that he hadn't only been thinking about his own dream. He had been thinking of her, of a future for her even after he was gone. That thought made her chest tighten, a feeling that was equal parts sorrow and love, pressing her to take action. He had seen something in her that she had forgotten, a strength, a resilience that grief had dulled but not extinguished. Determined, Margaret decided she would go back to that small coastal town. She didn't know what she expected to find there, but she felt that she owed it to both James and herself to at least see it again, to stand in the place where their dream had once blossomed. She pulled out an old map from a drawer, brushing off the dust, tracing her finger along the familiar path from her town to the coast. She wondered if the shop still existed, if it looked anything like they had imagined. She laughed softly to herself, recalling how they had once joked about painting the door a bright, cheerful color, something that would make people smile as they passed by. The next morning, she packed a small bag with only the essentials, a few clothes, the journal, and the letter from James. As she closed her suitcase, she glanced around her home, seeing it in a new light. It had been her sanctuary, a place where memories were tucked into every corner. But it had also become a cage, binding her to a life she felt bound to keep out of loyalty to him. But now she sensed he was releasing her, giving her permission to step beyond those walls and embrace something new. Margaret hesitated for a moment as she gripped the doorknob, feeling the weight of what she was about to do. This wasn't just a trip, she realized. It was a journey into the unknown, guided by a man who was no longer there to walk beside her. She felt the pang of loss as she stepped outside, but alongside it was a flicker of excitement, something she hadn't felt in years. As she locked the door behind her, she whispered softly to herself, "All right, James. Let's see where this leads." The journey to the coast was both familiar and strange. Margaret had traveled this route years ago with James, back when the world seemed vast and filled with possibilities. But now, with each mile, her anticipation grew, colored by a tinge of uncertainty. She watched the changing landscape out the car window, fields fading into rolling hills, the sky brightening with a clear, soft blue as the coastline neared. She felt a gentle warmth from the sun, as if nature itself were urging her forward, quietly assuring her she was on the right path. Arriving in the coastal town, Margaret felt as though she'd stepped back in time. Some of the storefronts had changed, and there were new cafes, but much was just as she remembered. She parked her car and walked along the main street, the faint smell of salt and sea filling the air, mingling with the scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery. She felt a strange sense of déjà vu as she passed shops with vintage signs and storefronts decorated with seashells, just as they had been years ago. She could almost see her younger self, hand in hand with James, laughing as they dreamed aloud of a life spent by the sea. As she walked, Margaret's heart raced, wondering if the shop James had written about was still there. She could hardly believe it, but then, down a small, cobbled side street, she saw it. The shop looked almost untouched by time, small, quaint, with a weathered sign that read "The Seaside Corner." Her heart skipped at the sight. She remembered the night they had stood in front of this very door, laughing under the streetlight, talking about how they'd painted a shade of yellow so bright it would be impossible for anyone to pass without smiling. With a mixture of nostalgia and curiosity, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The air smelled of old wood and lavender, a combination that reminded her of her grandmother's home. The shop was quiet, and the shelves were filled with trinkets, handmade jewelry, small antiques, and sea glass bottles that sparkled under the light filtering through the windows. She noticed a faded painting on the wall, one of a woman standing on a cliff overlooking the sea, looking wistfully into the distance. The entire place felt both cozy and timeless, like a small sanctuary in a busy world. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Hello there, can I help you with something?" Turning, Margaret saw an elderly woman behind the counter, her face lined with years and softened by a gentle smile. The woman's eyes sparkled with warmth, and Margaret felt a sense of comfort, as if she were meeting an old friend. She cleared her throat, feeling slightly foolish, and introduced herself, explaining that she had once been here with her husband many years ago. The woman's smile deepened with understanding. "I see," she said, glancing at Margaret with a knowing look. "Many people come here searching for something, a memory, a piece of their past. This shop has seen a lot of that." She paused, studying Margaret with a kind gaze. "You know, it's funny. Just last week I found a key hidden behind the counter. It looked old, and I didn't know what it was for. Perhaps it's something that was left here waiting for the right person to come along." Margaret's heart raced. A key? She felt a strange pull, as if fate were guiding her through a story written long before she ever arrived. The woman handed her the small, tarnished key, and Margaret turned it over in her palm, feeling its weight, imagining James's hand brushing it once, long ago. The elderly woman gave her a soft nod, seeming to understand everything without needing any explanation. "Sometimes," the woman said, "we don't find what we're looking for until we're ready to see it." Margaret looked at her, the woman's words sinking in deeply. She realized that she wasn't just here to remember James or find a piece of their past. She was here to discover a new chapter in her life, a new way to honor their love by carrying forward what he had left behind for her. Leaving the shop, Margaret clutched the key tightly, feeling an unexpected surge of hope. She didn't know where it would lead, but it felt as if James was still by her side, urging her forward with each step. And for the first time in years, she felt alive, ready to explore whatever awaited her just beyond the next bend. Margaret walked out of the shop and stood on the cobbled street, the key resting heavily in her hand. She felt its smooth, worn edges as if she were holding a piece of James himself, a bridge between the past and the future he'd secretly prepared for her. The sky had started to change, the soft afternoon sunlight casting a golden glow over the town, and a gentle breeze from the sea rustled her hair. For the first time in years, Margaret felt that this was exactly where she was meant to be. She wandered back toward the shore, lost in thought, wondering where the key might lead. The woman in the shop had mentioned it had been found only recently, hidden away as if waiting for her arrival. Margaret couldn't help but smile at the thought of James somehow orchestrating this moment, leaving small signs for her to follow. The key felt like an invitation, perhaps to discover something more of him, or maybe a hidden part of herself that she'd left behind. As she neared the beach, Margaret's eyes caught sight of an old, familiar inn just a short walk from the shore. She remembered staying there with James, back when they had spent a magical weekend exploring the town, dreaming of their future. The building had the same welcoming charm as before, with its pale blue paint and flower-filled window boxes. She found herself walking toward it, as if led by an invisible hand, her heart filled with a strange mixture of nostalgia and anticipation. Entering the inn, Margaret was greeted by a young receptionist who wore a warm smile. Margaret inquired about a room for the night, feeling an urge to stay in the place where so many of her memories had been shaped. As she checked in, the receptionist handed her a small, handwritten note along with her room key. Surprised, Margaret looked at the note, which was addressed simply to the one who seeks. She felt a shiver down her spine as she opened it, her heart racing. The note was brief, but it took her breath away. Not all keys unlock doors. Some open hearts. Follow the path by the cliff and trust what you feel. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the words felt undeniably like something James would say. Margaret clutched the note, her pulse quickening. She felt as if she were walking through a dream, each moment guided by a force beyond her comprehension, yet so deeply personal and real. She felt James's presence, leading her along this journey in a way only he could. As the evening drew near, Margaret found herself standing at the start of the cliffside path, the one described in the note. The path was lined with wildflowers, their colors vivid in the fading light. She looked down at the key in her hand, feeling its weight once more, and began walking along the trail, the ocean stretching out beside her, vast and endless. Every step seemed to resonate within her, like she was moving closer to something she was meant to find. The air was thick with the scent of salt and blooming wildflowers, and the sound of waves crashing against the rocks filled her ears. Her mind raced with memories of James, his laughter blending with the sea breeze, his warmth mingling with the glow of the setting sun. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the years they had shared, for the dreams they had woven together, and even for this bittersweet journey he had set her on. Each memory felt like a message from him, a reassurance that she was following the path he had always known she was strong enough to take. As Margaret rounded a bend, she saw something ahead, a small, weathered bench overlooking the sea, its wood softened and lightened by years of wind and sun. She approached it slowly, noticing a small, carved heart on the bench's armrest with initials, J and M. Her eyes filled with tears as she realized James had left this mark, a quiet symbol of their love, waiting here all this time for her to find. She sat down, the key still in her hand, and looked out at the ocean, feeling as if she were finally, truly with him again. In that moment, the key, the journey, and the memories all fell into place. She knew without a doubt that this journey was his final gift to her, not just a path to follow, but a reminder that she carried his love with her always, and that he had never truly left her side. As Margaret sat on the weathered bench, the key nestled warmly in her palm. She felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a feeling she hadn't known in years. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, its vastness mirroring the depths of her love for James and the life they had built together. The sun was beginning to sink beneath the horizon, casting a warm glow that bathed the waves in shades of gold and crimson. In this quiet, sacred moment, she could feel James's presence more strongly than ever, as if he were sitting beside her, holding her hand. She traced her fingers over the carved initials, J and M, feeling the grooves worn into the wood. How long had this symbol of their love been here, hidden in plain sight, a silent testament to their bond? Margaret remembered that evening years ago, when she and James had first stumbled upon this spot. They had joked about how this bench would be theirs if they ever moved to the town, a private perch to watch the world drift by. She hadn't realized then just how seriously he had taken that moment. He must have returned here to leave this mark, a promise that he would always be with her, even if they never got the chance to live that seaside life together. As she looked out over the water, Margaret remembered the key. She turned it over in her hand, feeling its weight and wondering if it held one final secret. Something in her heart urged her to keep looking, to follow this path to the very end. With a deep breath, she rose from the bench, letting her instincts guide her. She followed a narrow trail that led further along the cliff, winding down toward the shore where jagged rocks met the crashing waves. The path grew steeper, but Margaret pressed on, feeling an unexplainable pull. After a short walk, she noticed an old stone cottage nestled against the cliff, partially hidden by wild, overgrown foliage. It was small and weathered by years of salt and wind, but it had a charm, a life of its own. Something about it felt familiar, as if it had been waiting for her. Margaret approached, her heart racing as she saw a small, rusted lock on the door. She held her breath as she slid the key into the lock, half expecting it to resist. But with a soft click, the lock gave way, and the door creaked open. Inside, the cottage was simple but welcoming. Sunlight filtered through a window, illuminating the dust motes that floated lazily in the air. There was a small wooden table set with 2 chairs, a few shelves lined with books, and a faded quilt draped over a cozy armchair near the fireplace. She noticed an old teapot sitting on the stovetop, and a small vase filled with dried wildflowers on the table. Margaret realized with a start that everything here had been placed with intention, as if someone had prepared this space, hoping she might one day find it. Her gaze fell upon a small, framed photograph on the mantel. It was of her and James, from that very trip so many years ago, standing by the seaside, both of them smiling with the joy of new love and endless possibilities. Tears filled her eyes as she realized he must have arranged all of this, preparing a place for her to come back to. A place where she could remember him, but also begin anew. On the table, there was one final letter, her name written across the envelope in James's handwriting. She picked it up, hands trembling, and opened it. The letter was short, yet filled with his familiar warmth and wit. "My dearest Margaret," it read, "if you're here, then you've followed the path I always hoped you would. I know life has been difficult, but I wanted you to have this, our dream, the place we both imagined. It's yours now, a place to find peace, to live, to start again. Take this little cottage and make it your own. Fill it with love and laughter. And remember, I am always here, in every wave, every gust of wind, and every new dream you dare to dream." Margaret clutched the letter to her chest, feeling as though she could almost feel his arms around her, comforting her with that quiet strength she had leaned on for so long. She knew now that he had left her a legacy not only of memories but of hope and renewal. This cottage, this simple little place, was his last gift to her, a sanctuary to fill with new life and happiness, as he had wanted for her. As she looked around the cottage, a calm determination filled her heart. She would honor his wish. She would bring this place to life, not just for his memory but for herself, for the woman he had always believed her to be. She closed her eyes, whispering into the empty room, "Thank you, James. I feel you here with me, and I promise I'll make this place ours, just as you dreamed." The days that followed were unlike any Margaret had known since losing James. She settled into the little stone cottage, letting the walls absorb her presence, her laughter, and the gentle rhythm of her daily routine. Each morning she would walk down to the shore, her footsteps leaving faint impressions on the sand as she gathered sea glass and driftwood, small treasures she planned to use to decorate the cottage. In the quiet moments, she felt closer to him, almost as though he were walking alongside her, admiring the sunlight on the water and sharing in this new chapter he had prepared for her. Margaret began to breathe life back into the cottage, painting the walls, rearranging the furniture, and hanging fresh curtains that swayed with the coastal breeze. She filled the shelves with books James would have loved, stories they had once shared together, and new ones she had yet to explore. She took her time with each piece, each color, and each small detail, weaving memories of their love into every corner of the home. It was a slow, deliberate process, but it brought her a joy she hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose that seemed to flow through her hands and into the walls of the cottage. One afternoon, as she was planting flowers in the small garden by the front door, a friendly voice called out from the path. Looking up, Margaret saw the elderly woman from the seaside corner approaching, a gentle smile on her face and a small basket in her hands. Margaret rose to greet her, feeling as though the woman had come to witness this quiet transformation. The woman handed Margaret the basket, which was filled with fresh herbs, as well as a few flowers that would brighten the cottage's windowsills. "I thought you might enjoy these," the woman said, her eyes twinkling knowingly. "This little place has been waiting a long time to be loved again, and I think it's found the perfect person to make it a home." Margaret thanked her, touched by the simple gesture, and invited the woman inside. Together they shared tea in the cozy kitchen, talking about the town, the people who had come and gone, and the stories that lingered in each corner of the cottage. Margaret felt as though she were speaking to someone who understood, someone who could see the invisible threads connecting the past to the present, binding her to this place and to James. The woman listened quietly as Margaret told her about James's letter, the key, and how she had come to discover this hidden part of their lives. As they sat together, the woman reached across the table, her hand gently resting on Margaret's. "This place is yours now, Margaret. It's not just a memory. It's a gift to help you grow, to live again. Don't hold back. Plant your roots here. Fill it with love and laughter and allow yourself to dream again." That's what he would have wanted. The woman's words settled into Margaret's heart, reinforcing the promise she had made to herself. She realized that this journey wasn't just about honoring James's memory. It was about embracing the life he had envisioned for her, one where she could find joy again. With newfound courage, she made plans for the cottage. She started small, sketching ideas and gathering supplies, but her dreams grew with each day, expanding in ways she hadn't anticipated. She decided to turn the front room into a cozy reading nook, complete with shelves filled with books for visitors who might come to share a cup of tea or sit by the fire. She envisioned filling the space with plants, flowers, and small mementos from her walks along the beach. And she began to wonder if perhaps she could open the cottage to others, a place for those seeking peace just as she had once done. Maybe it could be a small bed and breakfast, a place where people could come to rest and reconnect, just as she had found herself here by James's silent guidance. As the days turned into weeks, Margaret watched the cottage transform, each change echoing a piece of the dream she and James had once shared. The cottage became a reflection of both of them, their love woven into its walls and their hopes blooming in the garden outside. She felt an indescribable joy as she realized that by fulfilling James's wish, she was creating a legacy of her own, one that honored their life together, but also allowed her to stand on her own, grounded in a new beginning. On the last day of spring, Margaret stood in the doorway of her transformed cottage, breathing in the scent of fresh flowers and the sea breeze. The garden was alive with color, the walls were warm and welcoming, and every inch of the space was filled with the love and care she had poured into it. She whispered a quiet thank you to James, feeling his presence in the light and warmth surrounding her. She was no longer bound by grief. Instead, she was filled with hope, her heart open to whatever the future might hold. And in that moment, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home. Months passed, and Margaret's little cottage became a place of quiet magic and renewal, not only for her but for the people she welcomed into its walls. Word spread through the coastal town of the charming seaside retreat, lovingly restored by a kind widow with a gentle smile and a soulful warmth. Locals and travelers alike found themselves drawn to the cottage, seeking respite in its cozy rooms and peaceful garden. Margaret had transformed it into a small bed and breakfast, just as she had dreamed, giving each guest a glimpse of the joy she had found here, a joy James had so carefully guided her toward. Every morning, Margaret prepared breakfast for her guests, filling the kitchen with the aroma of fresh bread, brewed coffee, and the herbs she had planted in the garden. She would set out small vases filled with wildflowers on each table, her heart full as she watched the guests marvel at the simple beauty around them. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment as she shared her space, her stories, and even bits of James's memory with others. In a way, each person who stayed at the cottage became part of the legacy she was building, a legacy that honored love, life, and second chances. One evening, just as the sun was setting, an elderly couple arrived, weary from their travels but visibly enchanted by the cottage's charm. Margaret welcomed them with a warm smile, guiding them to their room and sharing a bit of the cottage's history. The wife, a gentle woman with silver hair, looked around with wide eyes, taking in the decor and the warmth that radiated from every corner. "It's beautiful here," she whispered, almost as if speaking to herself. "It feels like a place where love lingers." Margaret's heart swelled, and she smiled softly. "Yes," she replied, "it was created with love, and I believe it brings people here for a reason." The couple stayed up that evening, sitting by the fire in the common room and reminiscing about their own life together. Margaret joined them, sharing stories of her life with James, the unexpected journey she had taken, and how the cottage had helped her find herself again. The three of them laughed, shared memories, and even shed a few tears. Margaret felt as if each guest, each conversation, was a gentle reminder of all the ways love continued to shape her, even in James's absence. She saw pieces of her own story reflected in those she met, a tapestry of human connection and resilience woven through time and shared memories. After the couple had retired to their room, Margaret wandered out to the garden, standing among the flowers she had planted with her own hands. The stars were bright, scattered across the clear night sky, casting a soft glow over the sea and her beloved little cottage. She closed her eyes, breathing in the cool night air, and allowed herself a quiet moment to feel everything that had brought her to this point: the love, the loss, the hope, and the courage it had taken to turn her pain into something beautiful. As she stood there, a gentle breeze rustled through the garden, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender. She smiled, feeling as though it were James himself, a soft reminder that he was still here, in the flowers, in the laughter that filled the cottage, and in the lives of those who came seeking the same peace she had found. The journey he had set her on was now complete. She had found the life he had wanted for her, and in doing so, she had learned to live fully once more. In her heart, Margaret felt a deep, abiding peace. She knew that while her journey had been born from the love she and James had shared, it was now hers alone, a life shaped by her own hands, her own dreams. She whispered a final thank you to the night, a message sent to the stars, knowing that James was somewhere out there, listening, proud of the woman she had become. And as she turned to head back into the cottage, Margaret realized that she wasn't simply moving forward without him. She was carrying him with her in every step, every smile, and every act of kindness she shared with others. The life they had dreamed of together was now real, alive in the walls of the little cottage by the sea. And Margaret was finally, truly home. As the seasons changed, Margaret's cottage continued to flourish, becoming more than just a retreat by the sea. It grew into a gathering place, a small sanctuary where people found healing, friendship, and a reminder of life's quiet beauties. Each guest left their own mark, adding a piece to the cottage's story in a way that felt like a tribute to James and his vision for Margaret's future. She began keeping a guest book by the door, inviting visitors to share a memory, a thought, or a piece of wisdom they'd gathered during their stay. The book quickly filled with heartfelt messages, notes of gratitude, poems, and reflections left by those who had found a moment of peace within the cottage's walls. One autumn evening, as Margaret sat by the fireplace, she took the guest book into her lap, thumbing through the pages and reading the messages left behind. She paused at an entry from a young woman who had stayed only briefly, yet whose words seemed to echo deeply. "Thank you for reminding me that love can linger in places we least expect. Here, I felt my own burdens lighten, and I remembered that happiness is never too far away." Margaret smiled softly, her heart warmed by the knowledge that she was helping others find what she herself had once sought. This cottage, this life she had built from loss, had transformed into a beacon for others seeking comfort and joy. She could sense James in the quiet hum of these shared moments, as though he were smiling at her from afar, proud that she had created something that could touch so many lives. One day she received a letter in the mail from a couple who had stayed with her during the summer. They wrote of how the serenity they'd found at her cottage had inspired them to renew their wedding vows and reminded them of the deep bond they shared. They enclosed a photograph of themselves standing by the sea, arms wrapped around each other, and wrote, "Thank you, Margaret, for helping us remember who we are and where we began. Your home is a place where love never dies." Touched, Margaret added the photograph to the growing collection she kept in a small box by her bedside. These memories were like small treasures, a tapestry of human connection and resilience, a testament to the quiet power of love and healing. They had become her own personal reminders, proof of how her life had transformed, and how love, once thought lost, had found new ways to shine through the lives of others. As winter approached, the cottage took on a new kind of beauty. The garden became quieter, the once brilliant flowers settling into a delicate dormancy. Inside, the walls were adorned with dried flowers, cozy blankets, and small tokens left by guests. Each evening, Margaret would sit by the fire, wrapping herself in the warmth of the cottage, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the life she had built. She found comfort in the rituals that now filled her days, the simplicity of making tea for her guests, of preparing the rooms with care, of watching the world pass by from the window seat. One snowy evening, as the town lay blanketed in quiet, Margaret found herself reflecting on everything that had led her to this point. She thought of James's final letter, of the key he'd left for her, and of the path he had set her on. What had once seemed like an impossible journey had turned into a gift, a life not just of survival, but of joy, purpose, and fulfillment. She realized that in giving her this cottage, James had given her the freedom to live fully, to embrace the beauty of each new day, and to discover her own strength. As the fire crackled softly, Margaret felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She understood now that love, true love, doesn't vanish with time or distance. It remains, evolving into something that gives strength, that nurtures, that connects people in ways unseen. James had entrusted her with a dream that became a refuge for so many, and in doing so, he had ensured that his love would live on, not just in her heart, but in every guest who walked through the cottage door. She glanced out the window at the snowy landscape, feeling as though James was there with her, watching over the home they had dreamed of together. And in that quiet moment, Margaret knew that life would continue to unfold in its own beautiful way. She would greet each day with open arms, filling her little cottage by the sea with laughter, warmth, and love, knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be, a keeper of memories, a builder of dreams, and a testament to the enduring power of love. Years passed, and Margaret's little cottage by the sea became a cherished part of the town's landscape, a place woven into the hearts of those who came and went. It was as though the cottage itself had its own spirit, a gentle, welcoming energy that seemed to draw people who needed it most. Locals would often see Margaret tending her garden, her hair now silver and her hands as nimble as ever, lovingly pruning roses and gathering sprigs of lavender to place by each guest's bedside. In the spring, she would plant new flowers, and in the autumn, she would collect the golden leaves, each season adding its own touch to the cottage's charm. Margaret had created a true haven, a place where guests were not just welcomed but embraced. Every detail of the cottage was imbued with her care and love, from the carefully chosen books on the shelves to the handmade quilts that draped each bed. She had decorated the walls with framed photographs of the sea, small seashells arranged in patterns, and, of course, a collection of photographs and mementos left by her guests. Each piece represented a story, a reminder that love and kindness could bridge even the widest of gaps. One morning, as Margaret was preparing tea, she noticed a young woman standing by the guest book near the entrance. The woman looked thoughtful, her fingers tracing the cover of the book, as if hesitant to write anything. Margaret approached with a gentle smile, sensing that the guest was carrying something heavy in her heart. "Would you like some tea?" Margaret asked softly, holding up a steaming cup. The young woman looked up, her face softening as she accepted it with a grateful smile. They sat together in the cozy kitchen, and gradually the woman began to share her story. She had recently lost someone she loved dearly and had come to the cottage hoping to find some solace, some peace in the quiet. As Margaret listened, she felt a pang of recognition, as though she were glimpsing her younger self in this guest, a woman in search of healing, of answers, of a way forward after loss. Margaret offered her comfort, speaking of the journey she had taken, of the unexpected paths that love and loss had led her down. She shared how she, too, had once felt adrift, and how this very cottage had become her salvation, a place that allowed her to transform her grief into something beautiful, something that could reach others. By the time their teacups were empty, the young woman's eyes shone with hope, and her smile was soft, filled with gratitude. As the woman prepared to leave, she placed her hand on the guest book, writing a simple but heartfelt message. "Thank you, Margaret, for reminding me that even in loss, there is a path to light. I will carry your kindness with me, always." Margaret's eyes misted as she read the words, feeling the quiet, bittersweet joy that came from knowing she had, in some way, helped this woman find her way. As the door closed behind the guest, Margaret sat quietly by the window, her heart full and content. She reflected on how her life had become a tapestry of intertwined stories, each one woven into the next, each person adding to the ever-growing legacy of the cottage. She thought of James, feeling his presence as if he were beside her, smiling at the woman she had become, the life she had built from the simple dream they had once shared. In that quiet reflection, Margaret understood that this cottage was more than just a home. It was a testament to love's ability to grow, to heal, to reach beyond the boundaries of time and space. The life she and James had dreamed of had come alive here, not only in the memories they'd shared, but in the lives she had touched, the friendships she had made, and the peace she had helped others find. As dusk fell, casting a warm glow over the cottage, Margaret lit a small candle by the window, a ritual she had adopted to honor James's memory each night. She knew that one day, her time at the cottage would come to an end, that it would pass into new hands, carrying with it the countless stories, memories, and love it had gathered over the years. But she took comfort in knowing that, like James's love for her, the spirit of the cottage would live on, gently guiding others just as it had guided her. And as she sat in the quiet glow of the candlelight, Margaret whispered a soft, heartfelt promise to the night. "Thank you, James. Your love gave me everything, and here, in this little cottage, it will continue to grow, just as you wished." In that moment, Margaret felt a profound peace, knowing that love, true, enduring love, never truly fades. It lives on in every heart it touches, in every memory it leaves behind, and in every life it helps transform. As the years continued to pass, Margaret's cottage remained a beacon on the coast, cherished by both travelers and townspeople. Every season, new guests arrived, each one adding their own memories to the place. And each time, Margaret would welcome them with warmth and kindness, sharing bits of her own story if they wished to hear it. Her hair turned fully silver, her face grew lined with age, but her spirit was as radiant as ever, touched by each soul who came seeking rest, joy, and peace. One crisp spring morning, Margaret sat in her favorite armchair, wrapped in a soft quilt, watching the sunrise paint the waves in shades of rose and gold. She held a cup of tea, feeling the warmth in her hands and breathing in the fresh scent of lavender and rosemary from her garden. Looking around the room, she saw the photographs, the flowers, the books, all the small treasures that told the story of her life, filled with love, laughter, and resilience. The cottage was more than she had ever dreamed it could be. It was a place of transformation, of friendship, of new beginnings. In her heart, Margaret sensed that her journey here was nearing its close. She felt at peace with this understanding, knowing that she had given everything she had to this place, that it would remain a sanctuary long after she was gone. That evening, she opened the guest book and wrote a final message at the bottom of the last page. To those who come after me, know this: love is eternal. It grows even in the most unexpected places, finding its way to light. May this cottage always bring you peace, joy, and the courage to live fully just as it did for me. With love, Margaret. A few days later, the townspeople noticed the cottage's doors were closed, a soft quiet surrounding it. When they entered, they found Margaret resting peacefully in her chair, her hands clasped around a small photograph of herself and James, smiling as they had once been, young and in love by the sea. She had left this world as she had lived in it, full of grace, surrounded by love, and with a heart that had found its true home. Margaret's cottage became a treasured place, kept just as she had left it. Visitors continued to come, filling the guest book with words of gratitude, reflections, and memories, feeling Margaret's gentle presence in every corner. Her story, her love, and her spirit remained alive in the cottage, a lasting testament to the enduring power of love and the legacy of a life well lived. And so, the little cottage by the sea, born from the dreams of two people deeply in love, continued to be a place of healing, joy, and peace, welcoming all who came to seek solace in its walls. Margaret's life had left an indelible mark, her memory a quiet but powerful reminder to all who passed through. Love truly never dies. It lives on, blossoming in every heart it touches, like a flame that forever brightens the world. With this ending, Margaret's journey comes full circle, her life and love becoming an eternal part of the world she cherished.